What's up, YouTube? Ryan here, and today we're going to talk fast and take a long time to discuss Christianity and Halloween. Last week, we observed the coveted Friday the 13th, and in October no less, and to mark the occasion, Answers in Genesis and many other Christians posted an article about Christians and Halloween. I like Answers in Genesis, I like a lot of what they do, but like most Christians, when it comes to Halloween, Answers in Genesis entirely missed the mark and lacked any sort of scholarly research on the subject. So, Answers in Genesis has fallen victim to the lie that Halloween is a pagan holiday. Now, I'm often confused by the ignorance of most Christians these days, especially American Christians. It's like they honestly believe that between the book of Acts and their particular denomination, there was no church, and therefore no church history which bears witness to their faith. I'm honestly baffled by their willingness to mindlessly hand the argument over to the pagans. Not just on Halloween, but on Christmas and Easter too. What gives? Oh, Christians stole Christmas and Easter from the pagans, I suppose, but Christianity is still true, I guess. No! We didn't steal anything. Pick up a history book. Acknowledge that the church has existed every single day between Pentecost and today, and that her history is the most thoroughly documented of any other world religion. Don't hand the argument over to the pagans and then expect to still be an effective witness. Rather, always be prepared to have an answer for the hope that you have. These holidays belong to the church first. If anyone stole them, it was the pagans from us. Now, on this issue of Halloween, the main problem is pietism. Not to be confused with piety, which in its purest form is a good thing, but pietism. Pietism, which plagues American evangelicalism and Reformed theology, is just as egregious a thing as justification by works apart from Christ and the Roman Catholic Church of the 16th century. The holier than thou because we're not like the world, except for, your rock concerts on Sunday morning in your worship halls, but, you're not like the world. Pietism makes up all sorts of new rules that Christians must follow to be good Christians. It's inventing a law outside of the law given in Scripture, and it fundamentally ignores the freedom of the gospel. But suppose we should first start with the word holiday or holy day. Now, there's your first clue. The story goes that Christians yanked Halloween and sanctified it as a Christian observance to spite or to convert the pagans. And this is the same lie that's told regarding Christmas and Easter, to be honest. And ironically, many of the Christians who fall victim to the Halloween deception are incapable of applying the same scrutiny to it as they often sometimes do regarding Christmas and Easter. Truth is, Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, is and always has been a Christian holiday. Unlike neo-paganism and Wicca, Christianity is a religion founded not on folklore, but on documented eyewitness testimony over the course of 2,000 years. Of all religions, it's the most well-documented in history, and sadly, Christian history has fallen by the wayside in most evangelical circles, which is why they're plagued by repackaged ancient heresy and a false definition of piety. So where does Halloween come from? Well, when we see it called All Hallows Eve, or the Night of the Holy Ones, we get an idea. Halloween is to All Saints' Day on November 1st, what Christmas Eve is to Christmas Day. It's the night before. And this tradition comes to us from Genesis. There was evening, there was morning, the first day. We see it all throughout the Old Testament, especially regarding the Sabbath. As a matter of fact, this is why Christ was taken from the cross so quickly and so hastily buried before the Sabbath at around 6 p.m. on Friday night. In the first 3 centuries of the church, thousands of Christians were killed for confessing Christ, and it was a tradition to commemorate their martyrdom on the day of their martyrdom. But this eventually got to be too much, so we see very early on that one single day was set aside to commemorate and remember and celebrate all of the faithfully departed. This was known in the modern vernacular as All Saints' Day. Hallow being from All Hallows Eve, simply an older word for the holy ones or saints. The first example of this can be seen in the account of the martyrdom of Polycarp as far back as the 2nd century AD. And if you don't have a copy of this book, I highly suggest you get one. It's not authoritative like Scripture, but it's an historical account of early Christian thought and practice. So we read from near the close of the martyrdom of Polycarp. And so later on, we took up his bones, which are more valuable than precious stones and finer than refined gold, and deposited them in a suitable place. There, when we gather together as we are able, with joy and gladness, the Lord will permit us to celebrate the birthday of his martyrdom in commemoration of those who have already fought in the contest, and also for the training and preparation of those who will do so in the future. As early as the 2nd century, we see the church setting aside a day to celebrate the victory of Christ in the death of his saints. Precious in your sight, O Lord, is the death of your saints. This is important because the earliest documentation of the pagan observance of Samhain isn't written and established until the 10th century AD, 8 centuries after the church has established her tradition of All Saints' Day. The date changed, a bit in the early church, and I'm going to give a brief reading from a scholarly article on the subject, which the whole thing will be provided in the description below. Quote, later, a Christian bishop named Ephraim the Syrian mentions a common All Saints' Day in 373. In 397, St. Basil of Caesarea chose a day when the churches of his bishopric would honor the memories of all the saints known and unknown, alive or in heaven. Later, John Chrysostom mentions a common day of memorial for the saints in 407 AD. In the year 609 or 610, Pope Boniface IV established a date for All Saints' Day on May 13th, and later, in the early 700s AD, Pope Gregory III changed the date to November 1st. Decrees like this took a long time to propagate from Rome to the more remote areas where the church was founded, but the change in date had nothing to do with any pagan practices. Pope Gregory IV extended the celebration on this day to the entire Western Church in the early 800s. And again, the change took time as it spread from Rome. The point is this. A common day for commemorating the saints has been around throughout the Christian Church from very early times, and the fact that it falls on November 1st today has nothing to do with paganism. End quote. Now, neo-pagans and Wiccans like to claim that the source of Halloween is the Celtic festival of Samhain. There are 3 basic problems with this claim, though. 1, the celebration of All Saints' Day didn't originate in Ireland or any other area populated by Celts or their descendants. 2, none of the days on which All Saints' Day was celebrated had anything to do with any Celtic holidays. 3, the celebration of All Saints' Day in Celtic regions is documented to be older than the documented celebration of Samhain. So, problem number 1. All Saints' Day did not originate in the Celts. As I've already made mention, All Saints' Day was celebrated in Syria as early as 373 AD, in Caesarea in 397 AD, and in Constantinople by 407 AD. And in those days, it took a long time for traditions like All Saints' Day to travel, so the decree had been issued in Rome, but didn't have the power of the internet to instantly reach Ireland. Problem number 2. Samhain is a lunar harvest observance, which means it would only fall on October 31st about once every 30 years or so. Pagans are counting on you to not know the difference between a lunar and solar calendar, or the switching over from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. Don't fall for the lie. Their Halloween has never habitually been on October 31st until very recently. Problem number 3. The burden of proof is on the pagans that Samhain is older than All Saints' Day. But in fact, the opposite is true. We have a manuscript from 843 AD where the Irish Christian bishop wrote about the celebration of All Saints' Day. It was celebrated in the spring of the year at that time and in that place. The decree of Pope Gregory IV had still not reached Ireland, so that All Saints' Day should be celebrated on November 1st. But the earliest ever mention of Samhain in Irish folklore doesn't come until the 10th century, as cited in Ronald Huntington's 1996 book, Stations of the Sun, A History of the Ritual Year in Britain. There is no mention of Samhain outside of Ireland until centuries later. So what are the facts? Again, from the same article called Redeeming Holy Days from Pagan Lies, quote, these, then, are the facts. Samhain comes from the 10th century AD and is a newer invention. All Saints' Day is older than Samhain. All Saints' Day came from the practice of honoring the Christian martyrs in Israel, Turkey, and Syria as early as the 2nd century and later. All Saints' Day, and therefore Halloween, originated outside the Celts' sphere of influence and had nothing to do with what the neo-pagan and Wiccan claims about its origin. In fact, the newer holiday called Samhain was a lunar holiday. That means that it could be celebrated on any of 30 or so days in autumn of a given year, depending on when the harvest moon was recognized in Ireland. And very, very rarely did this moon happen on October 31st. The simple truth cannot be emphasized enough. Any book or website or article that claims that the ancient Celts celebrated Samhain on October 31st is perpetuating a lie. Modern neo-pagans and Wiccans invented their own calendar through the 70s and 80s, and they chose October 31st to be the day of Samhain. It is a move on their part to put forward the false claim that Halloween started in paganism. This is why knowing church history is important, guys, because the fact of the matter is that the church has been observing the Eve of All Saints' Day as early as the 2nd century AD, almost 2,000 years ago, whereas the concept of Samhain on October 31st only goes as far back as the 70s and 80s of the previous 20th century. So, here's the deal. Whatever your pietistic views on Halloween are, first and foremost, understand that Halloween is simply the night before All Saints' Day, just like Christmas Eve is the night before Christmas. And All Saints' Day was established as far back as the 2nd century AD. Samhain, the pagan holiday, the 10th century, and only in the 70s and 80s was Samhain on the 31st of October. So Halloween, All Hallows Eve, is a Christian holiday, a Christian holy day, where we commemorate the death of the martyrs, that faithful cloud of witnesses that has gone before us. Now, if you don't want to take your kids trick-or-treating, that's fine. But don't sit here and lecture me for dressing my kids up like a Ninja Turtle or a Paw Patrol and tell me that I'm a bad Christian because I'm participating in a pagan holiday. No, I'm participating in an American holiday invented by the Candy Corporation, which has its origins back in Christian thought, doctrine, and practice. Halloween is a Christian observance, and whether or not you choose to observe it, that's on you. I don't judge. Don't judge me. But is there any other reason that Christians might have to celebrate on October 31st? Oh yeah, the restoration of the gospel of Christ crucified to the church. There's a reason to celebrate. And we are on the 500th anniversary of the start of the restoration of the gospel to the church. Until next time, happy All Hallows Eve, blessed All Saints' Day, happy Reformation. God bless.